and foremost by realizing self-worth, self-belief, and looking inward, so that when you look outward, it is to supplement not a vacuous state of nothingness and inferiority, but it is to supplement a very stable, solid foundation where your culture, where your values, where your value for people is important.
Thank you.
Wow.
How many of our presidents in ECOWAS are loyal to the citizens and to the oath that they have sworn? Alassane Ouattara, an illegitimate puppet of the West, will have the effrontery to tell people that he is willing. Why not? He's willing, because long before today, we are aware that Macron has been speaking to him, and that behind the scenes, he's been talking to the president of Ghana. And they were thinking that Ghana would simply supply the military to go. These people think that by virtue of the fact that they have been elected into office as heads of state, they have everything to dismantle and damage the nations that they represent. Alassane Ouattara served 2 terms, right? After his 2 terms, he virtually stepped down and said that he was going to allow people that he anointed to succeed him. Anytime he anointed somebody, the person died. Anytime he made a public pronouncement that this is the person that I will take over from me, Alhaji, the person doesn't last long. More than 3 people that Alassane Ouattara said that look, they were ready to take over from him, all of them died. The last one was Koulibaly, that he said, oh, he is not going to contest, and then Koulibaly was going to. As soon as Koulibaly died, Alassane Ouattara somersaulted and went for a 3rd term. Where was Abdel Fattah Musa, the commissioner responsible for good governance and democracy? Could he speak? Where was President Nana Akufo-Addo when the constitution was violently overthrown by Alassane Ouattara, and he was imposed on the people because he is a puppet of France? Where were they when this happened? That illegitimate head of state in Cote d'Ivoire, giving the backings of France, is saying that he's willing and ready. Of course he should be willing and ready, because he is the one that we understand France is using. Go to Senegal, Alhaji. Macky Sall became president with a promise to reduce the term of presidency from 7 to 5, and with the fact that he was not going to contest for 2 terms, and they ensured that the rules were established. Soon after that, Macky Sall did everything to go for a 3rd term. Any member of the opposition that opposed Macky Sall's 3rd term bid is in jail. There have been massive disruptions and instability in Senegal. The last one was the Trump Act charges they peddled against Ousmane Sonko, that he had gone to rape a lady, and it turned out that it could not be proven. What did the court charge Ousmane Sonko for? They charged him for inciting the youth. Listen, at the end of the day, somebody that had no freedom, they charge him, the court charge him for that corrupting the youth, and for that reason he should go into jail for 2 years, by which time the elections for which he is planning to contest would have been over. That Abdel Fattah Musa did not see and does not call for good governance, and to call on ECOWAS or ECOMOC to go and interfere, because Macky Sall was running down democracy. He did not see that. All of a sudden, Abdel Fattah Musa is the one who is virtually commandeering and bulldozing his way so that they can go and launch a full-scale war in Niger. We are waiting for them. They've never met their Waterloo. They will meet their Waterloo. See, France has been everything but dangerous to the wealth, to the health, and to the future of the young people of Africa. Why? Aren't you aware that the pact that France signed, which Modibo Keita refused to sign, which Sekou Touré refused to sign, for which reason these two persons were the first to be deposed after what happened in the Congo, in French-speaking Africa? What happened? They signed a pact in which France says that we are granting you independence. But whatever you produce, whatever you want to export, France should be the first option. And when France is not able to purchase what you are exporting at their own determined price, then France will recommend for you where to sell it. When you sell whatever you have exported, France will keep your money for you and give you 20%. Because you are not competent to handle your own money. So France will keep 80% and be given to you in bits. As we speak, the presidential villa in Ivory Coast, where Alassane Ouattara is staying, is a property of France where they are paying rent. Ivory Coast is paying rent to France. Alassane Ouattara doesn't see anything wrong with this. The water they drink in Cote d'Ivoire, they pay water bill and electricity bill to France. And so it has gotten to a point where the young people in French-speaking Africa think that, look, we have had enough of France. If our legitimate so-called elected presidents are incapable of telling France in his face that enough of that pact, then the military should come in. Or has the elections result of Bola Tinubu, has it been confirmed yet by the courts? No. The elections are in dispute. If it is not a useless institution like ECOWAS, how can somebody whose elections are still in dispute and are in contention be elected the chairperson of ECOWAS? Because his legitimacy is not fully confirmed. You go and confirm Bola Tinubu as the chairperson of ECOWAS. And a man who did not obtain majority of the votes, so take note, in his instance you can call it first past the post. Because he got about 8 million votes, Alhaji. Peter Obi got about 6 million votes. Abubakar Atiku got in excess of 6,000 votes. 6 million votes. If the two opposition parties add up, they are in the majority. What it means is that majority of the voters say that Bola Tinubu, you are not even competent to be president. So whose mandate are you carrying into ECOWAS to go and fight? More importantly, he probably, despite the fact that his elections are yet to be validated or invalidated, thought it wise that if I have to send troops to go and topple a regime in Niger, I need the mandate of my Senate. That is his parliament. Alhaji, he went to parliament. The fury in the House of Parliament, Senate, was so much that the vote to send troops from Nigeria to Niger was rejected. Roundly rejected. In our instance, when you need to commit your soldiers to battle another country, you need the approval of parliament. President Nana Akufo-Addo does not find it fit, because what it means is that Ghana is going to interfere or virtually going to attack another country. We are declaring war on another country. Has President Akufo-Addo come to parliament? No. And because Bola Tinubu failed to get his Senate, this particular security session of ECOWAS was moved to Ghana, where Alassane Ouattara and Akufo-Addo are in partnership with Macron to go and do the beating of France.
The intervention in Iraq was couched in very benign terms. The intervention in Libya was couched in benign terms. I could give you 100 interventions where the justification, objectively speaking, was on the basis that there was evidence either of genocide or evidence. I'm sitting in Rwanda. The international community stood by as the genocide against the Tutsi happened. Yet in the same year, they were intervening in West Africa. The construct of benign and malign is controlled and related to the question of narrative and strategic self-interest. We've often not paid enough attention, and thank you, Chairperson of the African Union, for educating us on how the international fora of decision-making, the Security Council and other fora, including at some stage how we transact within the International Criminal Court and other platforms. That evidence, and that was my point, we don't control data, we don't control digital platforms, we therefore are not controlling narrative in both analog and digital forms. What can practically be done? We do need to speak to Europeans not as victims, because the erasure of the contribution in European consciousness of Africans to modernity and civility has constructed a white supremacist view that sees the evolution of modernity as a singularly European contribution. And it is only now that our young researchers are beginning to excavate the contributions of black people, of Africans, towards inventions. Because until now, the province of economy was not the province of black people. In my country, in Zimbabwe, when land was taken, a British court gave a judgment that said, the question before them and who owned the land, they said, one thing is certain, it cannot be the native because the native has no sense of ownership. It was on that basis that land was taken. Number two, on the question of economics, even we pejoratively only talk about our people as informal law, informal economy, yet the informal economy is formal. That's how India developed through its cottage industry. That's how we have a psychotic addiction to colonial definitions of what, and that's why Professor Ashraf is correct. It's not just a narrative about our contribution historically, it's a narrative about our contribution now. Our young people who developed M-Pesa, which is now being used globally, who developed Ushahidi, which has been used by over 300,000 organizations, including the Japanese, the US military, and the NATO forces, are never sufficiently credited. Why? Because it is not in the current psyche of most Europeans possible that Africans are anything else except the object of charity that deserve our mercy and our pity. Why? Because they are governed by tyrants, right? Or Africans are incapable of ethics. And we've constantly said that Switzerland, which received the Abacha loot, which received the loot from the then Zaire and now DRC, has constantly been ranked in anti-corruption indices as the cleanest country in the world. PLO and I are lawyers. The receipt of stolen property is theft at law. How is it that you will have Nigeria and Kenya ranked so far, and yet the country that receives the money ranks so up? I think that if you're changing narrative, you also have to change behavior. Our African leaders and citizens constantly confirm the European caricature, an object of pity. When we come into these spaces, we can never transact revolution in courtesy. I like to be civil, to be courteous, right? But each time I start pointing to atrocities committed by African governments, the Europeans and the Americans cheer me up. Each time I refer to the historical atrocities and continuing atrocities committed first by governments and by companies that are dumping cyanide into our underground water and nuclear waste, right? You know what it is said? This is retrogressive. It's undermining investment. It's again, listen, we cannot win the narrative battle by arguing in pockets. They are happy us talking about our localized, indigenized oppression. They are never happy us talking about the question of distribution and redistribution of the global economy, of global power. And what Nkrumah and others realized in 1963 at the founding conference, if Africa is not represented, if Africa does not own its narrative, but you can't own your narrative if your leadership is totally disconnected from its people. You can't own your narrative if your intellectuals are totally disconnected. We have underinvested in rural areas and slums where the majority of our people are. In fact, we treat them as security threats and they are over-policed. Number two, we have underinvested in our academic and research institutions. We'd rather bring McKinsey and bring Deloitte and Touch. They will help us do AU reform. Why? Because there are no African consultancies that we know. Even if they exist, we have no relationship with them to help us with AU reforms, with anything else. And this is not a pronouncement on McKinsey or Deloitte. It's a pronouncement on ourselves. We have not, as a leadership, begun to recognize that the native is capable of knowledge. The native is capable of economy. The native is capable of invention. You can't change the narrative if the starting premise is we're trying to be like Europe and to catch up. We can't change the narrative when we're constantly trying to learn from others without understanding. And I'll end with that. What William Tunga said, the former Chief Justice of Kenya. He says, let's not engage in this romanticist view that there can only be one way to learn. We first must indigenize knowledge. That's what I said. Learn from our culture and traditions. Number two, we must diversify who we learn from. We can not only learn from the West. We need to learn from everybody who has something to teach. Number three, we must domesticate what we learn. If we're going to learn anything, let's domesticate. I think the chairperson and the minister said it's consciousness. Narrative is first and foremost by realizing self-worth, self-belief, and looking inward, so that when you look outward, it is to supplement not a vacuous state of nothingness and inferiority, but it is to supplement a very stable, solid foundation where your culture, where your values, where your value for people is important.
Thank you. Wow.